Most people get the story of Weimar Germany's hyperinflation completely wrong. It wasn't just about a government printing too much money. The real trigger was something far more subtle, and we're doing it right now. Honestly, we picture wheelbarrows of cash and assume it could never happen here. But that's the most dangerous assumption of all. Look, the Weimar Republic didn't start out wanting to destroy its own currency. They were dealing with a crushing, impossible problem. Can you imagine a debt so large it was measured in multiples of your entire economic output? That was the reparations bill from the First World War. The treaty demanded payments in gold or foreign currency, not German marks. So where do you get stable foreign money when your reserves are empty? You try to buy it with the currency you can print. Think about that pressure for a second. They had to sell billions of marks on the open market to buy pounds or dollars. What happens when you flood any market with a currency nobody really wants? Its value starts to fall, of course. And here's where the true nightmare feedback loop began. A falling mark made imported goods, like the coal and food Germany needed, more expensive. Rising prices for basics meant the government had to spend more marks to help its people. Where do you think that extra money came from? They printed it. That new wave of marks pushed the currency's value down even further. You can see the vicious cycle forming. It wasn't malice, but a kind of fiscal despair. Now, the central bank could have stopped this. Why didn't they raise interest rates or simply stop the printing presses? Because they were terrified of something else. They feared that crushing inflation would cause massive, immediate unemployment. Politically, that was an impossible choice. So they chose the slower burn of money printing instead. But then an unexpected event poured gasoline on the fire. In early 1923, France believed Germany was deliberately delaying reparations payments. They sent troops to occupy the industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. The German government called for a campaign of passive resistance. They told the workers in the Ruhr to simply stop. The state promised to pay those idle workers their full wages. Where do you think that money came from, with their most productive region shut down? The printing presses had to work overtime. The volume of paper money in circulation exploded almost vertically. Prices began to change, not by the month, but by the hour. Could you trust money that lost value between breakfast and lunch? People did anything to get rid of marks the instant they were paid. They would buy a bottle of vinegar or a single nail, anything tangible. Bartering for necessities became a national skill. Normal economic life simply vanished. Savings were wiped out in a matter of days. Life insurance policies became worthless pieces of paper. The middle class was utterly obliterated. Think about the psychological impact of that for a moment. Everything you worked for, every prudent decision, was rendered meaningless. Who do you think profited from this chaos? It was speculators and those with hard assets or foreign debt. A man with $1 could become a billionaire in marks overnight. This created a bitter, lasting resentment in German society. The social fabric was torn apart, and into that void stepped new, radical political forces promising order and revenge. You know how this story ends. But the lesson isn't really about Germany a century ago, is it? The warning is in the initial conditions, the political trap they walked into. Can we see any similar traps around us today? Look at the sheer scale of modern global debt. Honestly, the numbers are so large they've lost all meaning. What happens when a government's debt payments become its primary expense? It faces the same brutal choice Weimar did. Do you cut spending sharply and risk social unrest, or do you find a softer way out? Many are choosing the softer way, which involves their central banks. Here's a quiet, technical process that should make you curious. It's called debt monetization. That's just a sterile term for a central bank creating new money to buy government bonds. Sound familiar? It doesn't involve literal printing presses anymore, just digital keystrokes. The effect on the money supply, however, is eerily similar. We've been doing a historic amount of this since the 2008 financial crisis. Then the pandemic response turned the dial to 11. Trillions in new money were created globally to pay for emergency support. The initial result wasn't Weimar-style inflation, at least not right away. Why didn't prices immediately spiral out of control? Because the velocity of money, the speed it changes hands, collapsed. People saved it, or it got stuck in financial assets. But that was a temporary dam, not a permanent fix. What happens when that pent-up demand finally meets constrained supply chains? You get a sudden, sharp price shock. We felt that in 2021 and 2022, didn't we? Now, central banks are trying to fight that inflation by raising interest rates. But there's a massive hidden tension here. Higher rates make servicing that enormous mountain of debt unbearably expensive. So the choice returns. Endure the pain of high rates or find a workaround. Some are already whispering about financial repression. That's a policy of keeping interest rates below the rate of inflation. It's a stealthy way to erode the real value of debt. And who pays for that erosion? Anyone holding cash or government bonds sees their savings slowly melt. The middle class, again, takes a silent hit. Does any of this feel like a distant history lesson anymore? Weimar also had periods where inflation seemed to stabilize. They even introduced a new temporary currency called the Rentenmark. People breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the nightmare was over, but the underlying political willingness to make hard choices hadn't changed. The structural weakness remained. Today, we call our currencies fiat money, meaning they're backed by government decree. Its entire value rests on one fragile thing: public trust. What erodes that trust faster than anything? The visible, persistent devaluation of the money in your pocket. When people start to believe their currency is a melting ice cube, they behave differently. They spend it fast. They seek hard assets. They look for exits. That behavioral shift is the point of no return. We aren't there, not even close. But the path to that point is always paved with good intentions and impossible choices. You can see the first few bricks being laid, can't you? So what's the terrifying warning we're ignoring? It's the belief that modern banking magic has eliminated the very possibility of currency collapse. We think our digital money and independent central banks make us immune. That's the same kind of dangerous confidence they had before the mark began its final fatal plunge. Look at the political landscape in many indebted nations today. Is there a strong appetite to cut popular spending or raise taxes significantly? Or is the easier path to let inflation do the dirty work over time? Honestly, the pressure to choose the easier path is immense. Now imagine a triggering event, a modern-day equivalent of the Ruhr occupation. It wouldn't be soldiers, but perhaps a sudden loss of faith in the bond market. What if major foreign creditors decided to stop rolling over a nation's debt? The pressure to create money to cover the gap would become immediate and intense. The feedback loop between currency weakness and rising import prices would engage instantly. We're more globally connected than Weimar Germany ever was. Does that make us more resilient or more vulnerable to a chain reaction? A currency crisis in one major economy wouldn't stay contained. You'd see capital flight, competitive devaluations, and protectionist walls going up. The playbook from the 1920s feels uncomfortably familiar, doesn't it? But here's the crucial difference we can control: foresight. We know how this story ends if it runs its course. The question is whether we'll acknowledge the warning signs before the options narrow. Will we accept moderate economic pain today to avoid a catastrophic spiral tomorrow? History suggests we usually don't. We tend to kick the can until we run out of road. So what can you actually do? First, understand that cash is not a risk-free asset, especially over the long term. Diversify what you mean by savings beyond just the numbers in your bank account. Consider assets that have historically held real value across monetary regimes. But more importantly, be a voice for monetary and fiscal responsibility. Demand transparency about the true cost of endless money creation, because the final lesson from Weimar is not about economics, it's about society. Hyperinflation is a thief of time and trust, destroying the future people planned for. When that future vanishes, people look for someone to blame and someone to save them. They turn to simple, strong answers in a world that has become incomprehensibly complex. Don't let the specific imagery of wheelbarrows blind you to the underlying pattern. The pattern is a failure of political courage, masked by monetary tricks. We are not doomed to repeat this, but we are ignoring the same textbook. Close it, and look out the window at the choices being made right now. Are we learning, or are we just hoping the magic will last this time? The warning is clear. The rest is up to us.